Yesterday, I hosted a conference in Berlin where startups meet established industry leaders, and especially in the financial industry, it becomes obvious how these newcomers really frightened institutions that have been around for decades, if not longer. Many of them realize, banks and other financial institutions, they waited too long before they took digitalization serious enough, and now that they realize it, they fear they won't be able to address it fast enough. Startups are setting the agenda nowadays, and the incumbents not only have to think about innovating, they really have to innovate. From mobile payments to the blockchain, technology is forcing established business leaders to rethink how they operate. Our next speaker is the editor of Wired's UK edition, which you probably all know, and an award-winning magazine that reports primarily on the effects of science and technology. And he knows the companies that transform your industry. Many of them he knows by heart because he travels extensively to investigate the most innovative companies and entrepreneurs around the globe. And when I say extensively, I mean it. He had 110 flights last year, I believe. So let's listen carefully to what he has to say as he reveals the future of your industry. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome David Rowan.
Thank you. Morgan, nice to be here. I spend my time with the crazy ones who are inventing the future. They're selling their houses to build startups with maybe a nano chance of becoming the next unicorn. But I'm going to talk a bit about the mindset of the startups, because they see financial services as the big current opportunity. But also about the speed at which technology is changing consumer expectations, and also the way it's changing how business is being done more efficiently. And not necessarily focusing on what's happening with money. Just look at what's happening with drones. So 10 years ago, you had to be a national government to have a drone. This is a company that displayed at the Consumer Electronics Show 2 weeks ago. It's a Chinese company called Ehang, and their drone was designed to carry a person.
Ehang 184. After setting up the flight plan with a single click, user can take off on any location, sit, relax, and enjoy the flight.
Are you ready to travel around Zurich on one of these?
Ehang will always keep in mind of its humble beginning.
It's another consumer product. Again, think of Amazon. This is now a reality, delivering products to you by drone. Think of what it's meaning for narcissism. The selfie now has to be the droney. There's this gentleman on YouTube with quite a lot of followers, Alex Chacon, who has programmed his drone to track him, make him look beautiful wherever he is in the world. So there's a constant stream of Alex being tracked by the drone. And look how high quality these pictures are. I do think he's not going to get many girlfriends, because if you go on a date with him, he's just going to be posing to his drone in the sky. So that's just one element of technology. Let's look at another, just to give a sense of how quickly things are moving. Self-driving car.
Gosh, this is so... I'm not touching it at all, and it's driving. Whoa, the lanes are getting a little... Oh, no, there it goes, and it stops. I mean, being here in a Tesla Model S P90D with ludicrous mode, which is incredibly fun, but the fact that it could do all this itself, and you could see on here the vehicle in front of you that's following, and you could see where that is in its lane. And you could see all of the sensors going back and forth on the dashboard display here.
So this is a Tesla,
oh my gosh, it's changing
but every
lanes on
car
its own.
company is manufacturing autonomous vehicles now. Otherwise they won't survive. So what does this mean for motoring? In a couple of years we won't necessarily buy a car, we'll buy access to the network of autonomous vehicles. It's going to change the nature of business. And look at robotics more generally. This is a company that Google bought a bit over a year ago. Originally making military robots for the battlefield, this dog, they like kicking their robot dogs, don't they? No robot dog was harmed in the making of this, but it's now consumerizing this technology. The servo motors, the sensors are coming down in price as Moore's law pushes the cost down, availability, power goes up. What was something rare is going to be something common. Think of robots that are going to hit our lives sooner rather than later. So this is a company we wrote about in Wired that will cook meals in your kitchen. It models its movements after successful chefs, so it will do your work for you. Maybe this is one of the futures. There's a lot of work happening, especially in places like Japan, on robots to replace humans in the office, maybe.
Hello. Nice to see you.
Are we ready for this?
What is your job? I am a social companion. I can speak of emotions and I can recognize people. I recognize your Nadia. Nice to meet you again today.
Her name's Nadine. If you're ready for Nadine to be your office receptionist, they're developing her in Singapore. I don't think that's necessarily the one that's going to catch on. Whenever a new technology comes on the market, it changes the rules. It changes expectations if it meets certain conditions. So I want to take you back to 1983 when this new gadget hits the market. It has a few celebrity endorsers, but nobody at that stage could tell how successful the mobile telephone was going to be. And in fact, the big business leaders, the people who dominated the sector, showed how ignorant they were. AT&T, the American phone company that had more landlines than anybody in the world, millions of miles of copper cable, didn't know whether to invest in the mobile telephone or to ignore it. They'd done a lot of the IP development through their Bell Labs, but they still didn't know whether this was going to take off. So they called in the consultants. They called in McKinsey and said, it's 1983, give us an idea of how many mobile telephones there'll be in America by the end of the 20th century in 17 years. And McKinsey goes and does its calculations, and they come back with a number, and they say, well, we think it could be quite significant. We think there could be almost 1 million mobile phones in America, which wasn't a bad guess. It was slightly out. And there's 3 things McKinsey got wrong that we all need to think about when we're reflecting on a technology. First of all, Moore's law. The form factor changes very quickly. Suddenly it becomes actually much more functional. The second reason a technology catches on is not because of how many gigahertz and megabits it has. It's not about the technology. It's about the human needs it fulfills, the friction it removes from our lives, the emotional connection it gives us with the people, the things we love, which, of course, this does. And the third thing McKinsey made a mistake about was they framed their thinking in a very fixed way, and social norms change before you noticed it. In 1983, the social norm, if you wanted to make a phone call, was you would go home, you would go to the office, you would go find the public phone box. Today, if you take one of these away from a 15-year-old for more than 6 seconds, it's a human rights abuse. You'll be sent to The Hague. But what's really interesting is how suddenly it changes behavior. This is a slide from Mary Meeker about how many hours American adults spend per day on a digital screen. The green is the mobile, the blue is the laptop, the desktop, and the yellow is any other connected device. And this is from 2008 to 2015. But what's really interesting, yes, it's gone up, is we've moved from Americans spending 2.7 hours a day on these, doubling that to 5.6 hours a day. That's incredible. That's time they're not spending talking to their colleagues, going into a physical meeting, talking to their children. That's time they are on here. So if you are in wealth management, in banking, in insurance, in any financial services sector, this has to be the first thing you think about at the moment if you want to get the engagement of your customers. I'm going to talk a little bit about how this changes our mindset. There was a chat posted on the chat forum Reddit 2 years ago. Somebody asked a question, if somebody from the 1950s suddenly appeared now, what would be the hardest thing to explain to them about modern life? And my favorite answer was, I have a device in my pocket that is capable of accessing the entirety of information known to man, but I use it to look at pictures of cats and get into arguments with strangers. And if you think about these things, they are kind of changing social norms. They're changing business norms. We're now so addicted to our apps that there are apps to tell you how many times a day you're checking your apps. There are now new medical conditions. This one is called the 3-dot anxiety. You're so impatient about what the person is typing. Selfies are no longer cool. Dronies are probably not cool. This is a product released last year called the Belfie to take a picture of your rear side. It's that Kim Kardashian culture. I could not have forecast this. It's a real product. In fact, looking at Kim, she can teach us something about the crazy psychology of these devices and how they relate to economic markets. She released a game a bit over a year ago, a free game for Android or iOS devices. You could pay a bit of money inside the game to move more quickly, but essentially it was given away. Within 5 months, her free game had made her $43 million because these things go viral and people will pay inside a game for virtual goods because you gamify their minds. I saw this gentleman on Monday. He came to America from the Ukraine as a refugee, age 16, lived on welfare, on food stamps, got very frustrated how expensive it was to phone his family back in Kiev. So eventually, he tries to solve that problem by designing something to let you communicate for free, and you all use his product. In fact, when he sold WhatsApp to Facebook for $19 billion 2 years ago, he had almost 500 million active monthly customers. How much did Jan Koum of WhatsApp spend in 3 years to build up 500 million customers? How much did he spend on marketing plus advertising plus PR? A grand total of nothing. Because if you design a product that is simple and friction-free, you build virality into it. People in this network will do your work for you. Although when Mark Zuckerberg did buy WhatsApp for $19 billion, the BBC reported that it was because he saw it as an incredibly valuable WhatsApp massaging service, which to me explained that valuation a lot more logically. So I'm going to talk more particularly about finance. This man is one of the smartest investors in the Valley, Mark Andreessen, and he's talking a lot nowadays. I want to invest in companies that are going to disrupt the bank because that's where the money is. He talks about financial transactions as just data, and startups are really good at using data to optimize opportunities and to move more quickly than the successful incumbents. So I want to talk about 6 ways in which this sector is being challenged because the rules are being rewritten. It's partly because of these mobile devices, but it's partly because of the ability to track data through the ubiquitous network and increasingly through the sensors that we're finding in the physical world that are connecting to the network. And however successful your business is, you can't relax because the rules are changing too quickly. And the first of the things that I'm seeing changing is that crowd out there doesn't necessarily need the institution. We've moved into a new kind of era. It's a bit like the classic Marxist revolution, where we're moving from the power residing in a hierarchy with somebody at the top who's in charge, to it being distributed among the network. And I'll explain a bit about what I mean. In finance now, there are peer-to-peer lending services that are cutting the fees they're charging. The interest rates for borrowers are lower, for lenders are higher. That's a service that a traditional financial institution has traditionally been able to offer without much competition. Well, regulation's not going to protect you. Companies like Cedars, again, making loans from the crowd to early-stage companies. Everybody in that network transaction benefits. Just looking at peer-to-peer investments, it's on the rise. It's not going to go away. Anywhere you connect people, magic happens. I was in Kuwait. This is where the sheep traders of Kuwait now buy and sell their sheep. It's an Instagram page, This is a genuine phone number if you want to buy your loved one a sheep. But it's really interesting. They don't need to go to the physical cattle market now. They are all on the network. This saves friction. There's no cost attached. Why wouldn't they connect each other? And the same thing is happening in insurance. Peer-to-peer insurance companies like Guevara out of London, cycle insurance syndicates. You pool together with 15 other people with similar value bikes. You know each other through the social network. They connect you. There's an incentive not to claim, because if you claim, the syndicate will have higher premiums next year. Anybody want to guess what all these companies have in common? Dating company, travel, games company. Any guesses? Come on, you're all smart people. We're in Zurich. They all take a new kind of currency, which doesn't look like this because Bitcoin doesn't have a physical version. It's a crowd, a networked currency that has no owner. But this, I think, is going to be one of the fundamental triggers to change in the finance world. And already we're seeing a whole bunch of startups emerging to try and move things forward. Most of us get the wrong idea of what the Bitcoin economy is all about. Most of the press coverage is about the volatility of the exchange rate. That's not the story. What is really interesting is the ledger, the constantly updated book that records every transaction that's distributed through the network. Every transaction is recorded in every other bit of the network, so you can't fake it. And it is updated pretty much in real time. So there's no delays for transactions to be recorded. And there's no limit in what you can record on the blockchain, on this ledger. So Bitcoin is a number of things. You can store value in it, the unit of account. But think about ownership. Think about how you prove who owns this diamond. Well, governments are now starting to think, if we could create a distributed ledger of ownership, there can be certainty in real time about who the owner is. And this has implications for real estate, for the land registry. This has implications for the tax authorities. You can track who owes what because there's transparency through the system. And the cryptocurrencies, Bitcoin is not the only one vying for dominance. They're also offering a platform on which people can develop uninvented services. This is Reid Hoffman, the inventor of LinkedIn, very successful investor. He's investing very heavily in Bitcoin and blockchain businesses. He's based in the Bay Area. And I asked him, what is it about this fairly new, fairly high-risk category that makes you think it's going to be significant? And he says, for the first time, you can make money programmable. You can do things that the banks, that the insurance companies have never thought of doing. And when you allow creative people called programmers, developers, entrepreneurs to program things, they can invent new realities. Even the British government, the government's chief scientific officer, published a report a few days ago urging the UK government to develop the blockchain as part of the way it transacts. This is everything from working out who's eligible for welfare payments, to which traffic fine can be monitored, to which elements of tax should go where. This is a transformative moment, and I think you are at a moment of great opportunity. You need to understand this, and I think you need to think about how it's going to change the nature of your business. So the second of the big things that I think is changing the rules is we now have a bunch of very big, very powerful tech companies with hundreds of millions, if not billions, of customers that also have hundreds of billions of dollars in their accounts, and many of them think they are in the financial services business. And they have wide access to the tools with which people are transacting. Alibaba started out as an auction business, trading business. They don't charge commission unlike eBay, which is why they soared. Once you've got a few hundred million customers, though, you can become a really effective payments platform and then start globalizing. And I think we need to work out what the motivation of a lot of these tech companies is. Even Jack Dorsey, the founder of Twitter, he created Square. Within that, he's created a simple way of sending money to other people. He's calling it it's like a hashtag, but you put a dollar sign. It's called a cash tag. And all these people know design. They know user experience. They're trying to simplify the way you and I transfer wealth through the system because they want a commission. So at the same time, startups are trying to eat your lunch, but they are doing it in a very aggressive way because they have less to lose and they have more hunger. This is just one example. CB Insights took apart the HSBC website, looked at all the startups trying to unbundle that bank. Every service that the bank has, these companies, from payment services to investments to insurance, well, these are your new competition. And there's a lot at stake, which is why investors are betting heavily on the finance tech startups, because they've got advantages. It costs nothing to get into the business. You've got already your market connected. You know how to design interfaces that attract people. Unlike a clunky bank, you can move quickly. And unlike a lot of the traditional banks, a lot of the new startups are really quite good at developing loyalty and trust and even love, in some cases, among their community. And they move quickly. So I'm seeing everywhere new banks emerging who don't see limitations. Some of them using blockchain, some of them more conventional, some of them using the fact that there's transparency in the social world. Rather than go to an investment manager, why not go to eToro, where the crowd makes its financial investments through the platform and it's transparent so you can see who is the best investor and you can follow their investments. Foreign currency transactions. TransferWise, one of London's biggest finance tech companies, its whole advertising campaign is about saying rude words to the bank and showing people who love their service because it is transparent and it saves money at both ends of the transaction. It's unbundling the banks. So there's a German bank, Fidor, that I think is thinking in the sort of way we need to understand, because it's not just a bank. It sees itself as a community. It recruits about 20% of its staff from its chat boards, a bank having chat boards. It also has developer days. It invites people in to its headquarters to start hacking things around. It's now in Germany, but also in the UK, and it's thinking of moving into other territories. It puts its code up on GitHub, which is a repository for software developers to share their code and maybe improve each other's. And this is the way that Matthias Kroner, the founder of Fidor, this is the way he thinks.
We want to be the pirates of banking. Welcome. You are the pirates of banking. There is a need for new banking. As the Web 2.0 development showed us, there is a potential for new banking. I would say this is kind of a typical high street banker. You know, steering his old crappy bank through the wilderness and storm of this event, which he, by the way, caused himself.
And the challenger banks are growing where the conventional banks have been falling in terms of annual growth. So you can't ignore them. And the startups think in a different way. These are posters you see on the wall at Facebook's headquarters in California. You know, move fast and break things. Get the product out there, then work out if people actually want to use it. Get it out there before it's even ready, and then iterate. Question what kind of business you are anyway, somebody scribbled underneath. No, it's a poster-making company. On Saturday, I went to Iceland to talk to Arion Bank, the third biggest bank, built out of the ruins of Kaupthing, one of the big banks that maybe got a few things wrong. So when they launched Arion Bank, they thought, right, we have to start with innovation at our core. So they've done a few things. They've done a startup incubator, backing local startups, putting a bit of money in, taking a little bit of equity. But then they've worked out a lot of their companies are from the energy sector. They will value us not just as a bank, but as experts in bringing energy people together. So they've created an energy tech incubator. They've also created a way of incentivizing their staff to come up with new ideas. So there's like an internal incubator. You get time to work on your projects. One of the biggest banks in Europe is working with startups through a startup accelerator organization called Techstars, because they've realized they don't have all the knowledge. There's a very cool workspace in East London called Second Home, where a couple of hundred people either work desk by desk, or you can rent studios. There's a venture capital company, there's a design company, there is a virtual reality company. There's also the startup accelerator of Santander, because they know they need to be taking ideas in from this wider pool of creative thinkers. If you're not meeting the startups, you're missing out. You need to know how they're thinking and also benefit from being in their network, because they will benefit from being in yours. A big Spanish bank, BBVA, working with an Iowa-based startup called Dwolla that's transforming how payments are made, cutting out the credit card company and charging only a 25-cent transaction. That's smart by BBVA, I think. So a couple of other things that are happening. These things are encouraging people to expect as a norm that their experience should be touch a button, it's seamless. No longer is the next generation ever going to tolerate this when you press a button. This is something called a desire path, which is the path that the human beings take despite what you design for them to take. And too many of my journeys through the personal finance world aren't intuitive. You have to go with human behavior. There are whole blogs and tumblers about desire paths, but I think we always need to realize that the human wants to take that shortcut, because this is what we've been educated in. No longer will we tolerate these kind of unpleasant, friction-filled experiences that just get in our way, even if they're convenient to the organization, even if they protect our security. We don't care. Find a smarter way. Stripe, one of the fastest growing payments companies, is all about designing a smarter, simplified experience. Klarna, out of Stockholm, again, one of the most successful finance tech startups in Europe. It's all about making sure that transaction on an e-commerce site happens by them using data in real time to bear the risk, rather than you, the consumer, having to prove that you are a human being. Think of Travis at Uber, how he's designed something that is a seamless experience. When you get out of the cab, you don't even have to do anything to pay. You don't even have to touch the button. When you sign up to Uber, you don't even have to type in your credit card number. They've designed it so you just photograph your credit card. The work will happen behind the scenes. If you expect any of your customers or prospective customers to do any work, to fill in any paperwork, you're going to lose their attention. Find a way around as much as possible. Just think, in London, these guys have a design unit with 150 staff with job titles like this. You're going to have to start thinking about human behavior. One of the fast growth banks now in Europe is trying to be the anti-bank. It's a branch-based bank, but it's all about providing the services that people want. It's open in the evening, it's open on Sunday, dogs get free dog biscuits, there's toilets, there's toys for the kids. It's thinking about service. It's a bit like the Apple Genius experience. They're not there to sell stuff to you, they're there to make your experience of using the product more seamless, so you'll be more loyal. And I'm going to mention briefly how Facebook is seeing this opportunity. Facebook Messenger, you've probably been encouraged to download to collect your Facebook messages on the move. There's a reason for that, which is Facebook sees messaging as the next platform with which businesses will talk to their customers. And it's copying a Chinese company, WeChat, where in China you do everything on the app through the notification. You book cinema tickets, holidays, appointments with your doctor. And Facebook sees the notification economy as incredibly powerful. Also a way of keeping you away from Google, the open web, and also a way to keep you away from other people's proprietary apps. So Everlane is a fashion company. When you order your T-shirt, you can actually ask a question to a human the other side. Nobody likes emailing or phoning, but messaging, hey, everybody does. Do you have it in red? Hey, we got it. Should we ship it to you? Yes. What's your address? Ah, you had one to this address 2 weeks ago. Should we use that one? Track it when it's arrived. It's got an artificial intelligence agent, which helps reserve restaurants for you.
All right, now, the second thing that we want to talk about is making Messenger a place where you can easily communicate with the businesses you care about in addition to the people you care about. So currently, if you want to get in touch with a business, most of us probably still call them. But, I don't actually know anyone who likes calling businesses.
So watch this. I think it's going to be interesting. KLM, for instance, you could now book your flight through Facebook Messenger. It tells you when it's time to check in. You get your boarding card through the app. It tells you what gate, if there's a delay, if you have follow-up questions afterwards. All happens within there. And it's about designing seamlessness. The other thing people are expecting is you to talk to them as an individual, because Spotify talks to them as an individual. We all get our gene sequence nowadays for 150 euros, and we know exactly what our personal response to medication is going to be. We're in a world now where that has to be the expectation. And treat people as an individual. I was with a Swiss financial institution last week that takes its prospective clients on ski trips to beautiful places like St. Moritz, because it realizes it's about that personal relationship. It's not about selling. It's about knowing that person, knowing their family, knowing who they are, because that is the only competitive advantage one has in an increasingly commodified world. And treating people as an individual often benefits from using data to understand them better. And this is hitting financial services in a really interesting way. A lot of people, for instance, who don't have credit histories, well, the mobile phone will give you that. This is a company called Signify that's working in Africa, in Asia, tracking the movements of people on their phone to say, actually, this person has a steady stream through the city. They're probably in regular work. You can tell who they're talking to. If they're relatively high-value people, that's an indicator. What we're telling the social networks is data that can help you personalize your understanding of how important we are as clients. Companies like Lendo helping you make better decisions, lending decisions through social networks. Has to be done with our agreement, but most people seem happy.
What if your devices could read your emotions and respond to them? Emotioned is developing technology to do just that. Our industry-leading emotion-aware system will enable a revolution in device and application personalization. We're taking more pictures and videos than ever before. Imagine organizing this content by emotion, so your most memorable moments are easier to find.
Apple bought that company last week. Okay, this is a company that doesn't just know what you're typing, it now knows what you're feeling. That's getting interesting. Although my favorite example of emotion recognition, face recognition, there's an American company called Churchix that sells its services to churches so they can know from face recognition who said they were at church on Sunday but wasn't actually there. I like entrepreneurs. And the last of my kind of 6 reasons for change is it's a world of deep security vulnerability. Once you network everybody, there are risks everywhere. We will pay extra if we trust the people providing the services. And I'll give you, some examples. This is just an example of the prices that the bad guys offer their services to in the open web. You can put a botnet up to take down somebody's website pretty cheaply. You can hack a webcam. If it's a boy, it's a penny. If it's a girl, it's $1, which I think is slightly unfair. But this is all out there. I don't know how many of you own the 5,000 franc Sartis connected toilet. It's a very desirable toilet which comes with its own apps that can deodorize your toilet remotely and flush it when you're not at home. Well, there was a security consultant last year who issued a serious report warning that the Sartis toilet was vulnerable to hackers. If you had an enemy, they could access your toilet from anywhere and set it deodorizing all night, and there was nothing you can do about it. And I tell you this not because I feel I need to make you experts in the hackable toilet, just to remind you that as we become more dependent on the network, vulnerability increases everywhere, including these guys not just making money by tracking where your funds are, but trying to make mischief. John Chambers of Cisco talks about, this is last year at Davos, 2 types of companies, those who've been hacked and those who don't know they've been hacked. And I do think you need to be investing in very heavy IT security because it's a marketing advantage as a way of reassuring your client. This is Jake, who was an anonymous. I talked to him afterwards about, why did your team take down MasterCard? What was the motivation? Of course, we could. It was a game. It was like peer pressure. So what does all this mean? I think you have to start understanding that the rules are moving forward and there's new forms of science that are going to be very important. One of them is artificial intelligence. This is a London entrepreneur called Demis Hassabis, who has a company called DeepMind, which is trying to solve general artificial intelligence. This is not just translation or recognizing pictures. This is everything. Stimulate the machine and it will think like a human. It's going to take him a few decades. He's got no products. He's got no revenue. It didn't stop. Well, I'll tell you what he's been doing, actually. When I went to see him, he got very excited. They finally taught the machine how to play Space Invaders using the data input from the pixels. First half hour, he said, we didn't tell it the rules, just try and get the highest score. But it kept dying. An hour later, it starts to recognize when to shoot, when to hide. He said, we left it on all night. By the morning, it was the world's best ever Space Invader player. They got a cover article in Nature. This is what AI is, which is fun, but it's probably not necessarily a business. So this company with no product and revenue was bought by Google last year, £400 million, because Google knows long-term you need AI in everything. And I'll talk briefly about where it goes for financial services. This is Antoine Blondeau, the head of a company called Sentient, which is the best-funded AI company in the world, like 150 million francs, I think, he's raised more or less. And one of the things they're doing is using AI. They've created a fund to play the markets. And because they can read signals much better than existing algorithms, they are making a very high return. They're also helping people at e-commerce sites choose shoes that are going to suit them. But I think reading the financial markets is probably more interesting. There's another company using AI and data and real-time analytics, something completely different. Orbital Insight uses real-time satellite data to track retail sites, how many cars there are in parking lots, which suggests how well that company's doing. They say they can get a 2 or 3 month advance warning of a retail chain underperforming or overperforming. This is a company we're writing about in Wired at the moment. It's using AI to develop pharmaceuticals to hit cancer in new ways. It's turning apart the existing model for drug development. There is an issue about jobs going because of the AI. There's an online survey that National Public Radio have made where you can type in your job and it will tell you your chances of being automated in the next decade or 2. Paralegals, not so good. Telemarketers, we don't mind that most of them are going to be replaced. And bookkeepers, the good news is if you want to keep your job, dentists are probably not going to be replaced by the AI anytime soon. More seriously, the data that the network is giving you has big market advantages. We all know that Netflix is obsessed with data. It wasn't the humans that told it, this House of Cards thing will be big. It was because the data said there was a gap for political dramas. They had confidence they commissioned a couple of seasons without asking the humans. Data in financial services gets really interesting. So this is one example. This is a company, The Flow, that's using real-time data analytics, telemetry, to track cars, so insurance companies can offer very, very targeted premiums. You don't have to have an annual premium, you can have an hourly premium, because the data is flowing. You can work out how wealthy people are simply by the patterns of their movement. This is a paper in Science. It went to Kigali, anonymized data, just based on the interactions people were having. With their mobile phone, they can map which bits of the city are wealthy. This is a company we're writing about now called Premise, very interesting California company. it's paying 25,000 people on the streets of the world, amateurs, to take pictures of things on their smartphone that it tells them, how much are crops at the local market. And it's selling that data partly to organizations like hedge funds, partly to NGOs, partly to governments, because it has that volume of data. It can track prices, it can track Ebola spread much more quickly than any official report. This is just the beginning, and these things are empowering it. When you go for a job interview, increasingly, you're going to be asked to play a game. This is a game called Wasabi Waiter, where you have to pretend to be a waiter, because it tracks data to work out inside the game how good you are at delegating tasks, working with a team, making decisions. You should also tap into the crowd. This is one example. Prediction marketing, or prediction markets. The crowd, collectively, can often know more than the expert. Augur, a company that's recently got funded, is doing this for financial services, for commerce. Think about the crowd. This company has 750,000 rooms, but it took a century. This company has 2 million rooms. Just took about 4 years. Because it taps into the network, provides value. This company, BlaBlaCar, nobody thought was going to work. What do you mean you want to connect people with a spare seat in their car so they can go on a long journey with strangers? It's just been valued at $1.6 billion. And you need to keep innovating. Who knows? The dark web may be where you will have your customer-facing shop in the future. I think supermarkets could well be trading in the dark web if that's where the customer will go. Innovate like this company, which, although it looks like Apple, it's a Chinese company called Xiaomi, worth $45 billion at the last valuation, which first of all became notorious for copying Apple, and then, I went to see them a couple of months ago, became an icon of innovation. They've realized that you create, instead of customers, fans, and they do your marketing. They organize rock concerts where the fans gather, they can dance on stage with the executives. And they also invest in startups rather than buy startups, because the startups stay hungry and nimble. And all the accessories that really make the money from Xiaomi, because their devices have no margins, are made by the startups. Xiaomi just gives them access to 130 million customers. That's quite an innovative way of product development. Innovate in terms of what your customers want. Commonwealth Bank in Australia realized a lot of people were using its services to buy homes, to borrow money to buy homes, so why not become their friend in finding the best home? Within a few months, more than 1 million people were using their House Finder app. Even businesses you wouldn't think of as innovating. Big chicken fast food company in America, bigger than Kentucky Fried Chicken. I went to see them in Atlanta. Next to the big HQ, they have an 80,000 square foot, an 8,000 square meter innovation building where they're ideating, where people are playing with virtual reality and 3D printing, and they want all the staff to spend a couple of days a year in there thinking how we can change what we're doing. And this is a chicken sandwich company. Because this Moore's law exponential curve is going to keep rising. Computers are going to keep coming down in price. The linear age where 30 paces was 30 has moved to the exponential age where you double at each step, so by 30 paces you're 1 billion paces away, which is hitting all the things that used to be expensive and is making them cheap. Remember, not too long ago, computer storage was impossible. Now everybody gives it away. It's hitting the cost of sequencing DNA, logarithmic scale falling very quickly. It's hitting everything. It's hitting the speed at which a company comes from nowhere and becomes $1 billion company. And a lot of these finance tech startups are heading towards those valuations. It's hitting the speed at which consumers are adopting these technologies. So the world is changing. These devices are hitting the market this year. Microsoft, everybody is investing heavily. Are you ready for this? Are you ready for a world in which these two women have developed a new way of editing DNA called CRISPR, which, ethical debates allowing, is going to change the way we think about humanity? Are you ready for a world in which an entrepreneur, Elon Musk, designs rockets that land, come back, and are reusable, which NASA could never manage? Because for finances, this is going to be a big moment of change. So I leave you with a thought. 2007, this gadget hits the market. The head of a big tech company that made smartphones was asked on television whether he saw this as a threat. And he dismissed it.
$500 fully subsidized with a plan? I said, that is the most expensive phone in the world, and it doesn't appeal to business customers because it doesn't have a keyboard, which makes it not a very good email machine.
How did that work out, Steve Ballmer of Microsoft? Thank you for listening.
Thank you very much, David, for this inspiring talk. Questions, anyone? There was so much in your talk. One question. I talked to a lot of business leaders recently who all said they fear the Uber syndrome, i.e. a competitor coming out of the blue with a disruptive business model. A lot of people seem to be frightened of that. You can never be fully prepared, can you? Even if you talk to startups as you advise to do financial companies.
We're in a networked world, and in many sectors, the early mover who gains traction is going to be very hard to replace. Then the question comes, should regulators intervene as companies become pseudo-monopolies, oligopolies in their field? You can't stop, unless you change the rules, capitalism creating a few dominant players. It'd be nice to change the rules, but that's not really the Swiss way.
Do you think in 5 years from now there are going to be completely different players in the financial industry?
Yes. And in the motoring industry, and in the aviation industry. You can be one of those survivors, but I think you have to embrace the speed of change, the testing of your products in real time to see how consumer behavior is changing, and understanding the new possibilities of the sensor-enabled networked world and what it means for what was a traditional product.
Talking about speed, though, very often these huge institutions can't, even if they wanted to, they cannot act as fast and flexible as many startups can. Does it even make sense to try to compete
Absolutely,
them? Or would it be better to cooperate or just buy them, integrate them?
Work with them. Work with them. But I think if you ignore them, you're at a big disadvantage. No, I think you have to embrace them and work with them and explore for what model works with you, whether it's investing in them, whether it's buying them, whether it's partnering with them.
You briefly mentioned the big ones, Google,
Yep.
Apple, etc. Some of them have had banking licenses for for quite some time. How big a threat are they really?
Apple can do what it wants. If Apple wants to create an autonomous car division, it can take a lot of value out of the motoring industry. If Apple decides actually there's a lot of untapped value in the financial transactions it's doing, well, it can do that. I heard yesterday it's going to be opening a restaurant in some of its stores. You know, it can afford to take the risk.
David Rowan has to take his 111th flight now.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for your talk, and applause, please, for David Rowan.